The old house stood alone, dark, gloomy. It was Halloween night, the wind howled, leaves crunched under unseen feet. The house was called Blackwood Manor. No one dared to go near it. Legend said it was haunted. People whispered of strange noises and flickering lights and things that go bump in the night. Three friends, Max, Emily and Jake, stood before the house. The air was thick with the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of children trick-or-treating. The house loomed over them, its windows dark and foreboding as if it were watching them. They were dressed in costumes. Max, a vampire with a long flowing cape and fake fangs that glinted in the moonlight. Emily, a witch with a pointy hat and a broomstick that she clutched tightly. And Jake, a zombie with tattered clothes and makeup that made his skin look decayed and lifeless.
I dare you to go inside. The words hung in the air, a challenge that none of them could back down from.
Max said, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to sound brave, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his fear. He pointed a pale finger at the looming structure. The house seemed to grow taller, its shadow stretching out towards them like a dark, menacing hand.
You know the stories. It's haunted. The words were a reminder of the tales they had heard, stories of ghosts and spirits that roamed the halls.
Emily shivered. The thought of entering the house sent a chill down her spine. She pulled her witch's hat lower over her eyes, as if it could shield her from the fear that was creeping in.
Scared? Let's do it! Jake's voice was steady, filled with a confidence that made the others feel a little braver.
Jake, ever the brave one, puffed out his chest. He had always been the fearless leader of their group, the one who took on every challenge without hesitation, his zombie makeup making him look extra menacing. The fake blood and dark circles around his eyes added to the eerie effect, making him look like he had just crawled out of a grave. Together, they took a deep breath and started walking towards the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of their fear pressing down on them. The creaking of the old wooden gate sent shivers down their spines as they pushed it open. The gate creaked loudly, as if it hadn't been opened in years. The sound echoed in the still night, making them all jump. They stood at the entrance, hesitating for a moment. The door was slightly ajar, inviting them in with a sinister grin. Max, Emily and Jake exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. With a final look at each other, they pushed the door open. It creaked slowly, revealing the dark, dusty interior of the house. The adventure had begun. The friends crept towards the house. Each step felt heavy. The wind moaned around them like a warning. They reached the front porch. The wood was rotten. It creaked under their weight. Max reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold. The door creaked open, as if inviting them in. The smell hit them first, musty, like something long dead. The friends stepped inside, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and decay, making them shiver involuntarily. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang echoing through the empty halls. It felt as if the house itself had swallowed them whole. They were plunged into darkness, the kind that seemed to press in on all sides, suffocating and absolute. It was as if the house had a life of its own, and it was not welcoming. Emily fumbled for her flashlight, her hands trembling as she searched her bag. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her frantic movements. The beam flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The house was silent, an unnatural stillness that made their skin crawl. Except for their own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Each breath was a reminder of their vulnerability. They could hear their hearts pounding, a steady drumbeat of fear that echoed in their ears. It was a sound that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. They shone the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Every corner seemed to hide a secret, every shadow a potential threat. Cobwebs hung from every corner, thick and heavy with dust. The furniture was covered in a layer of grime, untouched for years. It was as if time had stopped in this place.
"I can feel someone watching us," whispered Sarah, her voice barely audible. Her eyes darted around, searching the shadows for any sign of movement.
Suddenly the temperature dropped, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into their very bones. Emily gasped, her breath visible in the frigid air. She could feel someone watching them, an unseen presence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. It was a feeling of being hunted. A cold breath on the back of her neck sent a shiver down her spine. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness and the sense of impending doom.
"Did you hear that?"
Jake whispered, his eyes darting around. He thought he heard a whisper right by his ear. They listened intently. Silence. Then a floorboard creaked upstairs, followed by another and another. Someone was walking around up there. Emily's blood ran cold. She felt a knot of fear in her stomach. This was a bad idea, a very bad idea.
"Let's get out of here."
She said, her voice high with panic. She turned to go, but Jake was gone.
"Jake?"
Max called out. His voice echoed in the empty house, but there was no answer. They shone the flashlight around the room, under the furniture, behind the curtains, but Jake was nowhere to be found. He had vanished. Panic seized them. They had to get out, now!
They ran towards the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was as if something was holding it shut. Max rattled the doorknob. He kicked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. Emily screamed. She pointed at the doorknob, a bloody handprint, fresh and dripping.
Terror lent them speed. They raced through the house, up the stairs, down the hallways, looking for a way out, for Jake. They could hear the footsteps following them, heavy and slow, getting closer.
Each room they entered was the same, dusty, cobwebbed, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. They were running out of time.
They reached the attic. A single window offered a glimmer of hope, but it was boarded shut tightly. Max threw himself against the boards repeatedly, but they wouldn't break. They were trapped with no way out.
The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence filled the air. Then a low growl echoed. Something was in the attic with them, something evil and menacing.
The door creaked open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest. The sound echoed through the dimly lit attic, sending shivers down the spines of those present. The air was thick with tension, and the musty smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled their nostrils. Emily and Max turned to face their doom, their eyes wide with fear. They had been exploring the old house on a dare, never expecting to encounter anything truly frightening, but now as the door slowly opened, they felt a sense of dread wash over them. Standing in the doorway was Jake. He was laughing, his eyes twinkling with mischief. The sight of him, so casual and carefree, was a stark contrast to the fear that had gripped Emily and Max. They had been expecting a ghost or some other supernatural entity, not their friend playing a prank.
"Gotcha!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the attic. The tension in the room broke, replaced by a mix of relief and annoyance. Jake had always been the prankster of the group, but this time he had taken it to a whole new level. He pulled off a fake bloody hand from his pocket, waving it around for effect. The sight of the fake blood and the realistic-looking hand made Emily and Max's stomachs churn. They had been completely fooled, and now they felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. "You should have seen your faces," Jake exclaimed, his laughter filling the room. Emily and Max couldn't help but laugh along, despite their initial fear. The absurdity of the situation was starting to sink in, and they realized how ridiculous they must have looked.
Relief washed over Emily and Max. They had been tricked, but now that the truth was out, they could see the humor in it. The fear that had gripped them moments before was replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared experience. It was all a prank, a Halloween scare orchestrated by their friend. They had been lured into the old house with tales of ghosts and hauntings, only to be met with Jake's elaborate setup. It was a classic Jake move, and they couldn't help but admire his dedication to the prank. A Halloween scare orchestrated by their friend. The old house on Harbinger Lane had always been a source of local legends and ghost stories, and Jake had used that to his advantage. He had spent weeks planning the prank, making sure every detail was perfect.
"You scared us to death!" Max yelled, his voice a mix of anger and amusement. He punched Jake playfully on the arm, his frustration giving way to laughter. Emily, still shaken, managed a weak smile. "That wasn't funny, Jake," she said, her voice trembling. But even she couldn't deny the thrill of the scare. Punching Jake playfully on the arm. Emily, still shaken, managed a weak smile. "That wasn't funny, Jake," she said, her voice trembling, but even she couldn't deny the thrill of the scare. The group of friends had always enjoyed a good scare, and this one would go down in their history as one of the best.
Jake just grinned, his eyes sparkling with satisfaction. He loved a good scare, and seeing the reactions of his friends was the ultimate reward. He had always been the one to push the boundaries, to take things a step further than anyone else. He loved a good scare. The thrill of the unknown, the rush of adrenaline, it was all part of the fun for him. And tonight, he had outdone himself. The old house on Harbinger Lane had provided the perfect backdrop for his prank, and he couldn't have asked for a better reaction from his friends. But as they turned to leave the attic, the mood shifted once again. The laughter died down, replaced by a sense of unease. The old house, with its creaking floors and dark corners, seemed to take on a life of its own. The friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The touch was icy, sending a chill down his spine. He turned slowly, expecting to see one of his friends playing another prank, but the look on their faces told him otherwise. A voice whispered in his ear, so close he could feel the breath on his skin. The words were barely audible, but they sent a wave of fear through him. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, its tone filled with malice. "You shouldn't have come here." The words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over. He spun around, his eyes searching the darkness for the source of the voice, but there was no one there.
Jake spun around, his heart racing. The attic was empty, the shadows playing tricks on his mind. He could feel the eyes of his friends on him, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. They had heard the voice too, but they couldn't see anyone. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the only sound the creaking of the old house. The friends exchanged nervous glances, their earlier laughter forgotten. The prank had taken a sinister turn, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. He was alone. Or was he? The question hung in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone. The old house on Harbinger Lane held its secrets close, and tonight it seemed it had decided to share one of them. The friends stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The house on Harbinger Lane held its secrets close. It had been the subject of countless ghost stories and urban legends, each one more terrifying than the last. And now, it seemed, those stories were coming to life. The friends couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the house held. And Jake had a feeling he was now a part of them. The prank had been fun, but now it felt like they had awakened something in the house, something that had been waiting for them. As they made their way out of the attic, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the house was alive and aware of their presence.